breaking down our top quarterbacks and our top tight ends for 2023 rookie drafts. Earlier today, you guys would have seen the running back video that we broke down our top 15 or so running backs tier maker style. We are going to combine the lesser cared about fantasy positions, quarterback and tight end. Even in super flex leagues, people don't seem to very much like talking about these quarterbacks because we kind of know who exactly everybody is. And we're going to combine that into one video today. So we'll try and break down these guys rapid fire. We already broke them down, in depth, what their skill sets are, what they do well on the pre-draft version of this, but we're going to just talk about them basically from a standpoint of where would we take them in rookie drafts and that kind of thing. So if you enjoy this video at any point, you know what to do. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Any comments down below always really help us in the algorithm, so we appreciate that. But before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, from an analysis standpoint, talking about quarterbacks and tight ends are obviously more icky to talk about than, your running backs, your receivers, your prized possessions, if you will, in terms of scoring fantasy points in the season. But let's not forget that if any of these quarterbacks hit, if any of these tight ends hit the highest end ceiling, we're talking about assets at scarce positions that can be elite difference makers in your lineup. And a couple of those guys, specifically at the quarterback position, we will be referencing today with that potential.
Yeah, for sure. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. All right, so let's go through these quarterbacks. For us, the way that we have them ranked is basically Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, 102, 103. I have firmly made the distinction now that I am on Anthony Richardson QB2 in fantasy. Danny's clapping for me in the background there. The more I think about it, the more I realize that market value favors Anthony Richardson quite a bit over CJ Stroud, which is an important factor. The landing spot for CJ Stroud is a little bit less than ideal in Houston with, Tank Dell and John Mechie to throw to versus what we have for Bryce Young in Carolina with the top, 10 offensive line last year, with the additions they made with Sanders, with Hurst, with, all the other guys that were added to that team. And then Anthony Richardson, of course, going to the absolute nuts range of outcomes for him, where he goes to learn with Shane Steichen. He goes to behind the Indianapolis Colts offensive line. He has Michael Pittman Jr., he has Jonathan Taylor. They had Josh Downs in the draft. So, let's talk about these quarterbacks from the start. That's kind of just like the overall landscape at the top. For me, Bryce Young is still the 102 because of everything that I just mentioned. He plays behind a good offensive line in Carolina. He has weapons to throw to now with the additions, and they're probably going to add more with, Jonathan Mingo, 39th overall in the draft. What are your thoughts on Bryce Young? And then we'll kind of talk about how he relates to the rest of the quarterback landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was our quarterback one pre-draft for each of us. He goes first overall, indicating that the NFL viewed him as the top quarterback in the class. And a funny tidbit that I quickly want to add too is it really seemed like at the end of the process that teams after the first pick really didn't know exactly what was going to go on at the quarterback position. We didn't know that the Texans were actually throwing up smoke screens in like CJ Stroud. We didn't know whether the Colts were going to take Levis or Anthony Richardson. The only thing that we knew for the past month is that the Carolina Panthers were in love with Bryce Young, traded a lot of futures to go up and secure him at first overall. They could have traded up to fourth overall. They could have traded up to second overall. They could have traded up to a different pick that probably would have costed less and still got them a top tier quarterback in this class. Instead, they went all the way to the top cabana. They went for that first overall pick. And it's easy to see why, because in terms of Bryce Young in college, the only weakness he has on his prospect profile is that he's 5'10". The playmaking is off the charts. Out of structure ability off the charts. Good arm. Very accurate downfield. Great at creating on the run. Like, this is just the full package of a quarterback prospect. And quite literally, if he was 6'2", 6'3", we'd be talking maybe not exactly Trevor Lawrence type of generational, but he would not be far behind. That is how good this guy is. And I do think at 102, you're getting a potential franchise quarterback with maybe Joe Burrow upside, Deshaun Watson upside. I'm all for it. And as much as I love this next guy and I understand that from a fantasy perspective, his ceiling is maybe even higher, I just think the floor ceiling combination of Bryce Young is what ultimately decides for him being my 102 personally.
Yeah, I think back to the scene in draft day when they're talking about the Kevin Costner's like, Montana was too small. Peyton Manning didn't have a good enough arm. Bryce Young's one thing, and the only knock on him is that he's too small. And I think that's what makes him a great quarterback, is because if he wasn't too small, he would realistically have no flaws, like you said. Anthony Richardson, again, who was my quarterback 3 pre-draft, I still think from a pure talent standpoint, NFL standpoint, if I'm trying to win a Super Bowl, that I would prefer CJ Stroud. But Anthony Richardson in a fantasy format is the better second quarterback off the board, in my opinion, because even though the floor from an NFL standpoint is low, he could lose his job pretty quickly if he's not a good enough passer. From a fantasy perspective, as long as this guy's a starting quarterback, he's going to be awesome for your fantasy roster because we know, most leagues 6 point per rushing touchdowns versus 4 point per passing touchdowns. Even if you play in a 6 point per passing touchdown league, you're getting more points for the rushing yardage. So Richardson, as long as he can develop as a passer to a competent Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts caliber passer, he's going to be one of the best assets in all of Dynasty Superflex formats because he can run the ball at such a high level. We know this guy was the most athletic quarterback in the history of the NFL Combine, beating out Cam Newton's previous score. We got a guy that, while he develops his arm, can run the ball to get out of trouble. If he's playing behind that Colts offensive line and it's not as good as it was in years past, and he needs to run more than he needs to, just like we saw with Justin Fields last year, he can absolutely do that as he develops as a passer. And he already has pretty good talent around him to help him develop. Like I said, Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, that's going to be a scary combination in read option situations. And you have Michael Pittman, who's a proven number one. Josh Downs, who we both loved, can be the number 2 long-term in that offense, and some tertiary pieces with Pierce, Jelani Woods, and some of the other guys.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And we will hear people in the comment section. We'll read comments that people have that will say, well, why are you guys so in on Anthony Richardson this year? Why is he quarterback 2? You guys were hyping up Malik Willis last year. Let me address that. Malik Willis, first of all, everything that Malik Willis represented from, an arm talent, from a running ability, from, a competition standpoint, from even just the raw traits, like we're looking at the size of them in its own right. Anthony Richardson dominates in every single aspect. The NFL gave us confirmation that they value him not only as a first-round pick, but as the 4th overall pick in the draft versus being willing to let Malik Willis slide to the 3rd round last year. And not to mention, like I kind of said, he is a more pro-ready passer playing with that competition in the SEC than Malik Willis ever was. So if any of you were thinking to go in the comment section and be like, well, what happened to Malik Willis? I'm not touching, the volatile quarterback. This is a completely different situation. His floor is what Trey Lance is right now if he doesn't develop. His ceiling, like you kind of said, is top 5 overall pick in your 2024 startup drafts.
Yeah, not to mention that Anthony Richardson's 21 years old instead of a 5-year starter or 5-year player like Malik Willis was, who had to transfer out of the SEC because he wasn't good enough to play and he had to go to Liberty. So yeah, the NFL showed us why Anthony Richardson should be valued this highly in our opinions, because he was the 4th overall pick in the entire draft as a 1-year starter who's raw, but still showcased some good ability to throw the ball accurately when his mechanics were clean and, sense pressure, which something that Malik Willis was not good at, and other things like that. So CJ Stroud is the other, and those columns on the left side basically just mean they're standing among dynasty quarterbacks, because I think Bryce Young is firmly a top 12 dynasty quarterback right now. Anthony Richardson about fringe top 12, but probably firmly in that camp for most people. CJ Stroud is just outside of these guys for most people, in the top 15, around the, CJ Stroud's along with Tua Tagovailoa and Daniel Jones, just ahead of those guys for me in my rankings, because, we do have a little bit more concerns. He's not the most high ceiling quarterback in the world. We did see that in the Georgia game, and I think he can do that at the next level. He can be, a Dak Prescott, what he's kind of become at this point in his career. But I worry a little bit that the Houston Texans landing spot will make it difficult for him to do hold value early on in his career. And we might see what we saw with Tua Tagovailoa after his rookie season, where he started to shoot down in value. And eventually Miami was able to build around him, trade for Tyreek Hill, draft Jalen Waddle, and all that good stuff. But the Houston Texans not having their 1st round pick next year, which was earmarked for Marvin Harrison Jr. most likely, that's definitely a problem for them. And they don't have really, outside of Dameon Pierce, who's a running back, any solidified above average starters on their offense right now. Maybe Dalton Schultz. The offensive line was 28th in the NFL in pass blocking last year. It's a good scheme, and I think the coaches can coach around it. But CJ Stroud has more of an uphill battle than the other 2 guys.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I quickly want to address this, a little rant from me. Obviously, not more so fantasy related. It's more so an NFL draft take. But Houston, what the hell are you doing? I don't care how much you love this edge rusher. Will Anderson, great prospect. Do not get me wrong. But you take your quarterback at second overall. You have arguably the worst pass catching group in the entire NFL. And you go and trade up for a fucking edge rusher. Are we kidding here? That 33rd overall pick should have been earmarked for a pass catcher. Your own first round pick, not even the Browns' first round pick, is what you gave up to go up and secure Will Anderson. Your own first round pick, you attach with the 12th overall pick, which you probably could have even selected Jackson Smith and Jigba with. I don't understand their team building philosophy. And as a result, I do think it has an effect on our standing of CJ Stroud. This would be a different feel if it was CJ Stroud at second overall. If at 12th overall, maybe you get a JSN there. And then possibly next year, you could add a guy like Marvin Harrison or Brock Bowers to this group. Instead, you're looking at a weapons core that it has a lot to prove. I'm a fan of John Mechie from last year. Nico Collins showed some flashes, but there is no consistent target earner on this team following the trade of Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, exactly. You could have even grabbed an offensive lineman at 12, and I probably wouldn't have even been as mad as well. So yeah, CJ Stroud, a little bit of a rough situation for him his rookie season. Hopefully if I was the Texans, I probably wouldn't even start him right away. I would you're going to be bad again. Just let Davis Mills maybe play a couple games until Stroud is ready. But at the same time, you traded your own first round pick away. So you don't get the benefit of being bad again and getting a high first round pick. So yeah, not a fan of the move. Even if Will Anderson turns out to be Nick Bosa, you probably set your quarterback back a little bit. And that's what it's all about. You take a quarterback second overall, your goal should be to make sure that guy develops, because if he does, not only is he not going to get you fired for missing on a quarterback, he'll probably keep you employed for being a great quarterback as well. We've seen what great quarterbacks have done for subpar coaches and subpar GMs for years.
One thing, look at the top 10 teams. Like if you were to make a power rankings right now, the top 10 teams in the NFL competing for a Super Bowl. The commonality in a lot of them is they got the right quarterback, they put the right weapons around him, and they developed them the proper way. You look at, for example, the only outlier realistically is maybe San Francisco, but even that, they got the system, they got all the surrounding talent. They just don't really have that elite quarterback. You look at the Bengals, you look at the Bills, you look at the Cowboys, you look at the Eagles, you look at the Chiefs. All of these teams have difference-making quarterbacks that were put in a position by the general managers to have talent around them to be able to produce at the MVP level you need to win a Super Bowl. And I'm just scared that the Texans are not currently in position to be able to help CJ Stroud in that aspect, but maybe I'm wrong. They have cap space. Maybe they go out and make a splash next year. Maybe that first round pick from the Browns, they draft a wide receiver. It could, brighten up from an outlook perspective this time next year. But especially as a rookie, like you mentioned, there could be a risk that this is a Tua Tagovailoa situation.
Yeah, and Tua obviously ended up working out, but that took a trade for Tyreek Hill and a pick of Jalen Waddle. If they draft Emeka Egbuka with the Browns pick next year and they go out and trade for, CeeDee Lamb, who doesn't want to get extended by the Cowboys, or somebody like that, T. Higgins maybe doesn't want to get extended by the Bengals, that would definitely brighten up the situation like you mentioned, but we can't pencil that in yet until we see it. And that Texans scheme should help CJ Stroud early on. Hopefully he doesn't play bad enough to lose value. That's the one thing I worry about Stroud. Right now, he is my 104, but I'm starting to think less and less that he's a lock at 104. If somebody wanted to take Jahmyr Gibbs above him, I wouldn't do it, but I understand it a little bit more than I did at the second the draft happened. And I was like, yeah, second overall pick quarterback, you don't, pass on that, because he could still lose value and be less valuable this time next year than Jahmyr Gibbs is, who could be the RB2 this time next year. So moving on to Will Levis, who was expected to be a first-round pick, was not a first-round pick, fell to the early second round to the Tennessee Titans. It sounds like they were trying to get back into the first round to get him. I think he's at a point now where I'm actually going to have some shares where I wasn't going to have some shares before, because if he had went 11th overall to the Tennessee Titans, then we would have had a situation where he probably would be the consensus 108, 109 right now in rookie drafts. And I probably would have favored, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, whoever fell behind him, and let my league mates come up for Will Levis. But now that he's a second round pick, I've seen him available at the 112, the 201, the 202 in some of my rookie drafts. And I think he's actually worth the risk at that point, because he's still the same quarterback that he was before. He just didn't get first round draft capital, which matters. But at the same time, if he can develop, he can become, a guy that we love in fantasy, because he can move, he can, throw, he has big arm and all that kind of stuff. He can be a Daniel Jones, a, Kenny
Tannehill.
Pickett, if not better type of option. And at the absolute nuts range of outcomes, maybe he's the next Justin Herbert, although I don't think that's likely. But Will Levis definitely an interesting option. And at the tail end of rookie drafts in the first round, where there's so much uncertainty with the running backs, you have a small running back, a guy with a bad landing spot. You have tight ends. How much do you value tight ends? You have a guy that actually has the ability to accumulate a ton of value in Will Levis.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if you were to break it down, like the Tannehill, the Daniel Jones, a guy like that who can move and be good for fantasy, that would probably be what, like the 70th, 75th percentile outcome, give or take. And
Yeah.
then obviously, Justin Herbert would be the 110th percentile. Let's just say, his 100th percentile, his max is like, what would that be mathematically? 85, 90% of Herbert? Like
Yeah.
top.
Matthew Stafford, maybe.
Matthew Stafford's actually a really good one. Yeah, no, exactly. He's got the upside. And in terms of the opportunity cost, if you're taking a potential top 20 quarterback as soon as a rookie, which is what both of we value Will Levis at, with the potential traits he has in store, if the opportunity cost is the 110, the 111, the 112 in your rookie drafts, at that point, if you're a contending team and you can get this guy as that developmental quarterback 3, let's say you have Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. I always throw around that quarterback duo for like contending teams, but it's just the one that comes to mind exactly. If you have Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts or any two of the top 10 in the league, and you want to take the swing on Will Levis in the late round of your rookie drafts because you don't have a quarterback 3, I think that's more than fine value on him, because the upside there is if he does develop, A, you don't need to rely upon him for point production right away. And B, then you have a potential trade asset that can net you a top 4 overall startup value this time next year, or top 4 round, startup value this time next year.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking right now at my rookie drafts that have happened. He went in the 110 of 3 of them and the 112 of the other. So he is available near that late first round area, and he has the ability, like I said, to become a top 3, top 4 round startup pick just next year. If we see a good rookie season out of the guy, and he doesn't have the best weapons around him, but if he just looks productive, performs well in the advanced metrics, has a high passing grade, all that kind of stuff, people are going to prop this guy up to like the 3rd, 4th round of startups because he's a young quarterback with job security at that point in time. So that is really all he needs to do, because we know he can run a little bit, because we know he has a big arm, and he might have a high ceiling as a result of that. So a QB3 option, a guy that's going to be in the 30s of our QB rankings, is Hendon Hooker, who's interesting, I suppose, because he went, in the early 3rd round to the Detroit Lions, which is a great landing spot for him. But at the same time, for me, I just don't envision Hendon Hooker getting a starting opportunity that's really, really real. Because even if Jared Goff is bad, let's say Jared Goff is like, 2019, whatever year his last year was in the Rams, Jared Goff. Hendon Hooker maybe starts a couple games at the end of the year. Maybe they bench him at some point. But at the same time, I think Detroit would still be in the quarterback market. If Kyler Murray becomes available on the quarterback market because the Cardinals are picking 1st overall, or, name X quarterback becomes available, Hendon Hooker is not precluding you from going after those quarterbacks. And that's what I worry about with him. Maybe he has a short shelf life, can start for a little bit. Maybe Jared Goff gets injured and he's able to start. But I don't envision a scenario in which the Detroit Lions are like, we are set at quarterback, we have Hendon Hooker.
It's very Teddy Bridgewater-y, or I mean, the max scenario you can see for Hooker is it's like what the Falcons are doing with Desmond Ridder right now, where he's slated to be the starting quarterback, but does anybody really believe he's the long-term answer for Atlanta? No, and the market reflects that. Like maybe at max right now you can get an early 2nd round pick for Ridder if someone's extremely high on him. Like that's the ceiling range of outcome for Hendon Hooker, in my opinion, that he's labeled as a starting quarterback coming into the year, but he is such a volatile asset that nobody's willing to pay up for the ceiling of what that could even represent.
Yeah, and I actually think Ridder was a better prospect than Hendon Hooker.
Agreed.
He was younger. He wasn't, he had athleticism. They both have athleticism, but I think
didn't have
it's
a
not
broken
a
knee.
good situation. He also has great talent around him, Desmond Ridder in the Atlanta Falcons, and not that Hendon Hooker wouldn't in Detroit. To me, it's just a low ceiling, low floor type of rookie pick to spend. So in the 3rd round, I'm okay doing it because maybe you get a spot start and you can net a quick 2nd rounder if he's starting at any point this year. But at the same time, I'm probably more likely to take a shot in an ambiguous backfield situation, or a wide receiver situation, or maybe even a tight end if one of those guys fell at that point in time. And speaking of tight ends, we are going to combine the quarterbacks and tight ends together in this video, as I mentioned at the beginning, and we're going to talk over our tight end tier list as well. So we're going to quickly switch that over and we'll be right back. All right, so you guys can see our tight end tier list. We have listed here on the left side where they rank amongst all dynasty tight ends. For me, at least, I don't know if you guys have, if you have these guys listed any differently, both Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid are inside my top 10 dynasty tight ends right now because they're young tight ends. They got high draft capital. Dalton Kincaid obviously going to the Buffalo Bills in the first round. Michael Mayer going to the top of the second round to the Las Vegas Raiders. For me, these guys are in the conversation for that 110 to 202 range of rookie drafts in Superflex and in one quarterback leagues where we have no idea who to pick. Once the first round receivers, the first round running backs, and the first round quarterbacks are off the board, all hell breaks loose. You could take Will Levis, you could take Devon Achane, you could take Zach Charbonnet, or you could take these two tight ends. For a lot of people, I think the market value would have Dalton Kincaid as the first tight end off the board because he went in the first round versus the second round of Michael Mayer, and he went to the Buffalo Bills, who have been talked about as deploying him as a slot receiver, and obviously he just gets attached to the right arm of Josh Allen, which we love.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about this on what our overall top 24 rankings that came out yesterday. But I mean, it's a pick your poison situation. We personally preferred Mayer coming into the draft. But I mean, if you, let's say you had them even and Dalton Kincaid gets a higher draft capital and a 10 out of 10 landing spot versus like an 8.5, I can see you preferring Dalton Kincaid. And like you kind of said, both of these guys are going to be top 10 ranked tight ends in terms of consensus. Both of them present a ton of upside in terms of target earning potential. And I feel like you can't go wrong taking either of them at the 1-2 turn.
Yeah, I mean, once you get outside of Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, and Dallas Goedert, I think these tight ends, value-wise on the market, are worth more than Pat Freiermuth, worth more than David Njoku, Greg Dulcich, those next kind of tier of tight ends. So for me, I firmly believe these guys are top 10 guys. And in Mayer's case, again, I think it's like a 9.5 landing spot for him. Like you said, Kincaid goes to a 10 out of 10 landing spot, first round draft capital. But for Michael Mayer, he was a better prospect. And again, we talked about these guys' prospect profiles in depth on the pre-draft video. But he lands in a spot that obviously knows how to use tight ends. It's Josh McDaniels' offense. They use Gronkowski. Darren Waller was there last year. He was injured, but he was used properly, the type of offense that he needs to play in. And Jimmy Garoppolo has long since used his tight ends, George Kittle, and even in the short time that he started for the Patriots, Rob Gronkowski, obviously. So I love the landing spot for both of these guys. They're both top 10 tight ends for me. The next guy was actually the second tight end off the board in Sam Laporta. He went off the board before Michael Mayer, which I think the Lions probably should have taken Michael Mayer, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Sam Laporta is more the move tight end that they were probably looking for. They traded away an inline guy in TJ Hawkinson. It looks like they're looking for more of a move guy. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's going to eat up most of the targets over the middle of the field. You have Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield now, who's going to get a lot of those checkdowns, a lot of those, short targets. And of course, you have Jameson Williams coming back from his suspension, who's going to be the downfield guy. Sam Laporta kind of represents a do-it-all option. He can do short stuff. He can do, intermediate targets with Amon-Ra. And he has the athleticism and the speed. He ran a 4.59 at the combine to stretch the field at the tight end position up the seam as well. And he was a top 35 pick in the NFL draft. And he was a great prospect, very productive at Iowa. So he's another guy that I think is locked in to the top 15 tight ends in Dynasty. Right now, I have him ranked over Darren Waller, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, Chig Okonkwo. Like, I would prefer him over all of those guys because I love his outlook. The only guys I have ahead of him are like Freiermuth, David Njoku, Greg Dulcich, and Evan Ingram.
Yeah, I currently have him ranked as my tight end 13 overall in Dynasty, in a tier with, like you kind of mentioned, Darren Waller, Evan Ingram, Greg Dulcich I had ahead of them too. And then you get to the other two guys with Mayer and Kincaid at my 9 and 10 slot. So if this guy is already ranked as a top 15 overall tight end in Dynasty, got the draft capital, got the landing spot we could have possibly asked for, and has the type of game that could end up prospecting into commanding targets at the next level, that short to intermediate yak tight end is typically the build we like seeing for fantasy points when it comes to fantasy football. So Sam Laporta's got all the traits, got the draft capital, got the landing spot. There's really no issues with his profile at this point. And in terms of rookie draft capital, if you want to take this guy in the mid-second, I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in tight end premium leagues. I think you could make the argument that he should be an early second round pick.
Yep.
For sure. And the next tier of tight ends is really challenging because these guys, some of them were bad prospects. Some of them went to the same team, and then some of them went to a bad landing spot. So with Kraft, with Musgrave, with Schoonmaker, with Washington, I'll start with the two Green Bay guys because they obviously go to the same team. Musgrave was the 41st overall pick to the Green Bay Packers, and then Tucker Kraft was the 78th overall pick to the Green Bay Packers. In my opinion, Tucker Kraft was a much better prospect than Luke Musgrave, and he was much more productive. Yeah, it was at South Dakota State, but we're talking about Luke Musgrave, who had 600 career receiving yards in 4 seasons. Like, he was not productive at all. So for me, I actually prefer Tucker Kraft. They both got day 2 draft capital. Just pretend they didn't go to the same team for a second. If Tucker Kraft went 78th overall to Jacksonville or something, and Luke Musgrave goes 41st overall to the Packers, I would still take 3rd round draft capital Tucker Kraft because I believe he's the better player. And I think once you get these 2 guys on the same field in OTAs and training camp and all that stuff, the coaching staff is going to see that he's the better pass catcher, and Luke Musgrave maybe a bit better of a blocker in line. And I think that's the roles that those 2 guys are going to play. So for me, I prefer Tucker Kraft, even though Luke Musgrave was actually the player that the Packers picked first.
Yeah, I would call this entire tier of tight ends, honestly, the pick your poison tier. Because like you kind of said, all of them kind of have their own warts in terms of their profile. In terms of Kraft and Musgrave, like you kind of mentioned, both get drafted to the same team, a little bit more volatility as to who's going to end up actualizing into the tight end one there. I mean, like the only real like similar situation you can think of in recent memory is when the Pats took what? Dalton Keene and Devin Asiasi back in 2020. Like, you don't usually see teams drafting 2 day 2 tight ends, but
Andrews and Hurst is the one that I've talked about, where
right.
the Baltimore Ravens took Hayden Hurst in the 1st round, Mark Andrews in the 3rd, and I thought Andrews was the better prospect, and of course he ended up winning the job, and he's obviously one of the best tight ends in fantasy and in the NFL right now. So I think Kraft, he would be in a tier with Laporta if he had gone on day 2
Agreed.
to a better landing spot. But the fact that he, goes to the same situation as Musgrave, I think he can beat him out. I think he's the better player still. But at the same time, they might give the go ahead to Musgrave because he was the higher pick or whatever.
Yeah, I would agree there. But like the reason why it's the pick your poison tier is because of the warts, like you kind of mentioned, the competition there with Luke Schoonmaker, older prospect turning 25 by week 2, I believe, and comes from a Michigan team that was throwing the ball like 25 times a game. So not a lot of volume there, though he does have that athletic talent, that blocking prowess to be able to get on the field as soon as possible. Not to mention the Cowboys showed that they can develop tight ends at a high level. And then with Darnell Washington, you got medical red flags now. Apparently teams were avoiding him in the draft because they were concerned about his injury issues. I don't exactly know what the medical concerns were, but that's the reason why he fell to the 3rd round, according to a lot of sources over there on Twitter. Not to mention, he is competing for targets at the tight end position on Pittsburgh with Pat Freiermuth, who is another tight end, top 10 tight end in Dynasty. So all these guys have their warts. It's basically, like I said, you're in the 3rd round of your rookie draft. You want, a high upside dart throw to spend at tight end. Just take the one that you like the best.
Yeah, and Washington was already going to have an uphill battle given his prospect profile. The fact that, I mean, it's nothing new for him. He's been behind better pass catching tight ends in his past with Brock Bowers at Georgia. But at the same time, you got to imagine that the Steelers are going to deploy him more as an inline guy because he's a better blocker than Freiermuth, and Freiermuth is a better pass catcher, a way more developed, way better profile coming out of school pass catcher than Darnell Washington. He was always going to have an uphill battle no matter what team he went to develop into a good pass catcher. But knowing that not only is he competing for targets behind Freiermuth, they also have George Pickens and Deontay Johnson on the outside there. And I mean, maybe Allen Robinson can do something in the slot. It's not a great situation for Washington. I think he was one of the bigger losers of the draft at this position because he might have, in a great landing spot, if he went to Jacksonville in the 2nd round or something, or Tennessee in the 2nd round, he might have been, a top 15, top 20 dynasty tight end. And instead I have him, just outside the top 20 tight ends at the moment. The upside tight end 3s tier is like the final guys here. For me, I love Zach Kuntz pre-draft. If you guys watch that sleepers video, I actually had him rated as my tight end 3. But he went in the 7th round, and the New York Jets is a great landing spot. But if he had gone there in the 3rd round, I'd be super, super excited about that. But a 7th round pick, it's an uphill battle to even make the roster, let alone get playing time and earn targets and compete for targets with Garrett Wilson, become the number 2 target on your team. It's a tough situation for Zach Kuntz. I think he's a good player. I think he can develop. Aaron Rodgers is obviously a great quarterback, and the offense will be good. But you got to temper expectations. He's probably a guy who's more of a priority UDFA, maybe a late 4th round rookie pick that is worth a dart throw, is a great option to take a shot on. But at the same time, you're not going to spend a 2nd round pick or a 3rd round pick on the guy.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I have a hypothetical scenario for you. If Zach Kuntz goes 4th round to the Jets, where are you ranking him in regards to this list?
I would rank him over everybody except for the top 4. So Mayer, Kincaid, Laporta, and Kraft would be ahead of him, and he would be 5 for me if he had gone 4th round, even not to the Jets, just to a different team. If he had gone 3rd, 4th round draft capital, I probably would have put him tight end 5.
Yeah, I would say at the minimum, he's within that tier and possibly, like you mentioned, in the middle to top of that tight end 2 tier. So just wanted to throw that hypothetical. Obviously, Brenton Strange, he did get the draft capital, I believe, right?
Yeah, he did, but he was not a good prospect. It's
Yeah.
basically just like a worse version of Schoonmaker, where Schoonmaker goes to the Cowboys, a better landing spot. Not that the Jags are a bad landing spot, but he went third round to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's going to play behind Evan Ingram to start his career, most likely. So I don't know. I just don't think Brenton Strange was all that good of a prospect, which is why I still would prefer Zach Kuntz to him. But I wouldn't blame anybody for just favoring the draft capital going third round. To the Jags is a good landing spot. Maybe he can develop into something. And obviously, pretty much every tight end that we've talked about on this list was good athlete.
Yeah, no, literally all these guys. I mean, this might be the freakiest athletic tight end class we've seen in a while. Aside from really Michael Mayer, who's still a fine to above average athlete. And obviously, of course, we didn't really see the numbers that Kincaid would have put up. Like Porta's a good athlete. Tucker Kraft, a really good athlete. Luke Musgrave, an elite athlete. Luke Schoonmaker, an elite athlete. Darnell Washington, a top 5 athlete of all time recorded at, in terms of the tight end position. Zach Kuntz, the most athletic tight end of all time, according to MathBomb RAS scores. Like, it is just a ridiculously athletic tight end class.
Yeah, these guys are good dart throws. Like late first round, Michael Mayer and Kincaid make sense. They're great options. Sam Laporta, or mid second round, awesome pick there. Kraft, Musgrave, Schoonmaker, Washington, all good third round tight ends that you could go after. And then Kuntz and Brenton Strange, late fourth round picks, priority free agents if they're not drafted in a lot of leagues. I think those guys are awesome options to go after. So that is the quarterback position. That is the tight end position. We are breaking these guys down in tiers. We did that. We will be coming at you guys tomorrow with wide receivers, running backs we did earlier today. So go check that out. Also, talked about the biggest mistakes to avoid in rookie drafts yesterday. Talked about our top 24 overall tiers, like we talked about earlier in this video yesterday as well. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're checking out all the other content. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Comment down below who we had too high, who we had too low, and all that good stuff. And if you want our full rookie rankings, go to flockfantasy.com and use the promo code FSE when you sign up for a 2-day free trial. 30% off all packages, 6 months free when you sign up annually. That'll cover you from this rookie draft season to the rest of the dynasty landscape, to best ball season, to redraft prep, to in-season content, to this time next year when we're breaking down prospects again. So signing up annually cannot encourage that any more than we already do. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.